Hey folks, I'm David Forey, a partner at KPMG, working closely with Pacific Life on their transformation journey. What we're actually going to cover for you today is the journey we've been on the FP&A side. And we'll take you through a couple of things that we've learned along the way, how we've approached it, how we've adjusted actually how we work and collaborate together. And I am extremely happy to be joined on the stage by Kimberly and Jay from Pacific Life to help with this conversation. Kimberly.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Gordon, and I am the head of expense management transformation at Pacific Life, and I work with Jay.
Hey everybody, I'm Jay Rash. I currently head our FP&A, financial planning and analysis at Pacific Life. So think of all the traditional planning and budgeting and forecasting, as well as a handful of other items, including leading our transformation efforts. And so maybe I could just give you a little bit of background of Pacific Life. I know some of you may have heard us. There's our whale. So if you watch college football or golf, you may see us come on there during some of the commercials. But we're about a 156-year-old company located in Newport Beach, California. We're a life insurance and annuity provider, both in the retail and institutional space in the US, and then we also have a global reinsurer as well. So on the screen, you'll see this One Pacific Life concept, and so that's a huge backdrop of our transformation. So if you kind of think about our history a little bit, is we've been a very decentralized organization. Different systems, different processes. We've had finance units within each of the divisions. And so as we've transitioned with the new CEO over the last couple of years, we've moved to this One Pacific Life concept. And it's really looking at how can we drive more operational efficiencies. We want to keep the strategic pieces close to the business. So when you think of finance, you'll hear me talk about a center-led model. And what I mean by that is we still want to maintain that strategic component as close to the business as possible, but then also implement and have a broader set of consistent processes and solutions there. And so as we go through here, as David mentioned, expense management was the first part of our transformation journey. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get into the rest of our broader FP&A pieces as well.
So with my experience in expense management and tactical operations, I could really see the value in this transformation journey. Prior to this transformation, we had data that was highly customized. We had different systems. Even within the same system, each division had their own forms, their own workflows, different ways of doing things. And then we also had a global division that was outside of the system. And so it made it challenging when we needed to draw together information and look at it across the enterprise to be able to even compare, because sometimes the data coming from the different systems would be different, or it might be interpreted differently. And so we had this goal to really look at how can we get a single source of truth? How can we normalize that data in a way that we can leverage it across the enterprise? And we wanted to make it so that when people went into meetings, that they didn't have a surprise. We had times where people would go into a meeting and say, why is the number looking that way? It's not what I thought it was going to be. And so you'd spend half the meeting talking about why you have that number versus what do these numbers even mean at the end of the day.
I'll give you a quick example. So I started in my current role 2 years ago. And for those that have been in these seats, I started in the role and our head of HR is prepping for a board meeting. Simple question. What's our expenses broken out by this category in these locations? And instantly, stomach drops, because that was like a 1-week turnaround. You got to go out to all the units. And so starting with that as the backdrop, and I always use that, like I feel stupid even saying it, but it's such a fundamental piece of how can you get to your true insights if we don't even have some of the basics there at our fingertips. And so starting from there to where the other day, I'll fast forward a minute, but the other day Kimberly got a question and we had it at our fingertips. And it was on a dashboard, and we could answer that same type of question. And so that's kind of just a little bit of the backdrop of where we were starting and where we're getting to.
And if I think about the starting point around this, it's It's very similar to where we see everybody else sort of before they start the journey. And I would say that Pacific Life, like so many others of, I'm sure, the audience in the room, you guys were like masters of Excel spreadsheets. And we are changing that, one step at a time. But the evolution and change away from Excel spreadsheet-based models to what we've done so far and where we're going with Oracle is a pretty cool journey to be on.
Definitely. And here you were, so a little bit about kind of our philosophy. So as we look in hindsight, one of the things that was a huge benefit for us was we call it our North Stars. But as you go through these types of transformations, as I know some of you know, you'll get pulled in 100 different directions. And by having a clear vision of those North Stars, you're going to get pulled, but at least you know where you're coming back to. And so for us, it was around number one, first and foremost, was we needed to have a global system. And we were going to go live with that to enable our budget process this year. And so that was first and foremost. And that would give us better data, that would give us the insights at our fingertips, but we never wavered from that. And so things would come up, and yeah, it would have been nice for us to have addressed that now versus later. But if we did that, then as David would tell us, you're not going to meet your North Star. And okay, great, let's put it on the backlog and we'll get to it. But having that and communicating that and keeping that front and center was critical. And then the other piece of that was around our org model. We needed to transition to more of a center-led model and get people from supporting just their division to now supporting the broader enterprise. And so we had alignment to the top of the house that this is the path we were going to go down. And so having that in our background was huge. So then when you think about the challenges, decentralized, lack of consistency in processes, data, a lot of the stuff that I know a lot of you probably deal with, but having those North Stars along with the leadership support. The leadership support is critical. We think back 2-3 years, we weren't yet at a place where we were aligned on this one Pacific Life concept. And so it felt more like a grassroots effort as we were trying to transform. Now when we have our leadership aligned, all the ducks fell in a row and we were able to actually just go out, put people like Kimberly solely devoted to it and go out and execute and get this done.
And I think, Jay, that you're sort of thinking about that North Star and the importance of it. It's been one of the things that we keep on coming back to repeatedly in many different ways, not just what is the outcomes, what we're trying to achieve, but also if we think about this journey about a globally consistent process, a single global system, there is a lot of effort and conversations that has to happen about how do we actually align what previously was highly autonomous and federated in the divisions to a single globally consistent process. And the decisions and trade-offs that we had to work through as to just because you've done it a certain way in the past doesn't mean that that's the way we're actually going to do it in the future. The system's going to enable it, and we're actually going to enable folks to have the same outcome that they're looking for, but it's going to be all in the same model and process. And so that kept on coming back.
Yep, and another piece on that would be, just for a little bit more backdrop, so our global unit, so they operate out of London, Bermuda, Japan, Australia, a good-sized global footprint. They weren't in any Oracle tool. Domestically, we had a custom-built expense management application that was within Oracle, and we've been using that domestically for a while. So then the challenge then starts to come to, you have one team fully used to a system that's been fully customized. Then you have another team fully spreadsheet-based. And then we're moving to EPBCS, and as much as we could, a standard out of the box. And so you have, from our global point of view, a step forward for them. And then domestically, you're losing a ton of this pure custom that we've been used to, that we've had over the years. And so you're trying to find that middle ground. And so in one regard, people might view it as a step back, but then if you put it in the context of our North Star, which was global data, global solution, global process, yeah, it might be a quick step back for a few people, but it's a huge step forward for the broader enterprise.
Yep. So before we dive into the sequence of events we want to talk you through, let me give you a little bit of context just around the journey with Pacific Life. So, and I'll give you a sense of the program because this is way bigger than just the FP&A side. And part of what we're going to cover all for you is that this is the first time that KPMG and Pacific Life have come together on a program of this size, scale, and complexity. And so you'll hear some stories from us about how we had to learn to work together to be successful together, and some interesting things that we had to do. But the breadth of program, and Pacific Life refers to it as Blue, it's much broader than just Oracle at the core, but within the Oracle scope and the finance piece that we're addressing, we're actually doing the accounting and reporting transformation while we're actually doing the FP&A piece. And so within that, we're going to Accounting Foundation, Accounting Hub, new ledger, new chart of accounts within that ledger, as well as then all the FP&A pieces. And within the chart of accounts pieces and the accounting and reporting that's so closely connected to the FP&A side, we actually had to work through a global chart of accounts design and process because PLRE was on their own instance of PeopleSoft versus US had their own. And so we had to bring those pieces together as part of even aligning on some of the common language we wanted to use and how we think about stuff going forward. And all of those things fed into some of the stuff that we had to deal with, Kimberly, on the expense side as we sort of got that foundation right. And those things, meant that we needed to have certain conversations as we go through it and be adaptable. And I think the journey we're on and the way we've approached it from foundation to where we want to go in the future, hopefully this group will find it valuable and insightful, and we'll also talk a little bit about sort of lessons that we've learned as we've gone through, and hopefully you can learn from some of the pitfalls and challenges that we've had.
Yep. And thinking back to kind of KPMG and David's point around their first really big project like that with us, one of my first projects at Pacific Life when I joined about 6 years ago was implementing Coupa, so for procurement, and KPMG was our partner as we went through that. And so we had a good experience there, but largely, that was 6 years ago. And so kind of a big gap there. And then as we came to this overall finance transformation RFP proposal, and no offense to David and any of the other consultants out there, but my view largely, all the firms are the same. I come from Deloitte in my background. I've had experience across a number of firms, but all the firms have the expertise. And so, there was no doubt whether KPMG or others, they all have the Oracle expertise. They all have the transformation expertise. But for us, to me, it came back to the people part of it, is that, all the firms are going to deliver. They're all going to have it, but what people are they going to put in front of you? And so that was critical. And working with David and team, they had been in for, I'd say, a mini project a couple years ago. And so they knew our company, they knew our struggles, they knew the culture. And so when it came time for the full proposal, they brought forth the right people, and ultimately that led to the trust element. We've certainly had our challenges along the way, but we've always had a trust that, especially David and I would always have the honest conversations. And we'll get to the challenges around how we needed to push that down to the rest of the team, because there were some challenges we experienced there, but overall came back to the people and how we move forward with each other.
And ultimately, Jay, you're working with KPMG, so I don't mind you saying we're all sort of, because it still means we're sort of ahead of the game. So folks, as we go through the rest of the conversation, the journey we're going to take you on is that we ensured we put the foundation in place first around expense management. And when we talk about expense management, it's the general expense side of the house as well as the workforce part of the equation. And that set a good foundation for us to move to allocations, and then the planning and projection. We're getting into more specifics around the insurance business and elements there. So we're going to take you a little bit through a journey across these three aspects and what we've gone, and we'll go a little bit deeper on the expense side where we've learned a lot and how we've adapted it. And so with that, Kimberly, let's start the expense journey.
All right. So with our expense journey, we really made a conscious effort to start small and look at how could we begin to have that incremental delivery of value for the organization. So there were some things along the way where we really needed to be flexible. So as we were going along, we found out that there were some things that weren't working. So one of the things we found is when it came to testing, originally we said, oh, well, we'll have the testers and they'll be 100% dedicated. And then we realized we're having business testers and we need to keep the business going. So we needed to step back and adjust our timelines and our plans to make sure that we had the time to do that testing. And through taking that time, really listening to the feedback and adjusting, that really helped to reduce the resistance to change. And it began to build confidence in the system and in the data that we had in there as well. And so that helped us to be successful as we began rolling it out, that people had a lot more confidence in it.
And I think the key takeaway from me, Kimberly, around that part was a little bit twofold. One, flexibility to understand what's needed from Pacific Life to go through that adoption journey. And where we originally, sort of on the KPMG's normal philosophy, as we go through CRPs and the likes, we typically would say, hey, there's 1 week that we're going to go focus on a CRP, and there's activities in between. But we quickly realized, actually, in the first round of testing that 1 week is not enough. We really do need to allow people 2 weeks of time to actually get in. And even more so when we start working with Jess and the team in international locations where there's a degree of flexibility we needed. So we adjusted the timeline. But equally, where we were dealing with more complicated things in Oracle, or things that were very different, exposing that to the business community earlier and helping them understand actually how is it going to look like, what's it going to feel like in Oracle, became really important as we went through it, because we didn't want to wind in a place where we sort of build something, then get to testing, and then find ourselves in places where it's like, well, that's not quite what I expected. So that adaptability, I think, was one of the key adjustments we made early on.
Absolutely, and being able to see things early on allowed us to get a better understanding of how does the system work, and that helped us to give you better requirements because we understood, oh, that's what you need to know how to build it. And so having that back and forth helped us to get to a better place.
And the other piece too is with our, as I mentioned, with our global unit, we underestimated the fact that they hadn't seen Oracle before. And so it sounds, in hindsight, it's like, well, of course, they don't use it, so how would they know it? But now you're exposing to them and saying, okay, go test this, you have 1 week, do it, and then report back. Well, that's not realistic. They've never used the system, and so we never trained them on even how to use the system. And so a lot of those learnings along the way that when you step back in hindsight, it kind of seems basic, but when you're in the thick of it and you're developing a plan, having that flexibility to change, and KPMG was supportive of that, even though it didn't perfectly fit with how they had expected we were going to run the program.
I have to adjust.
Okay, so going live. So we went live with EPBCS a couple months ago. We just finished doing our 25 budget in the system. And so that largely went pretty well. There were some struggles, of course, with using a new system, but all of that's now been put into the plan. And so we're moving forward with that. So that was definitely a success. At the end of the day, what all of this comes back to is business insights. And that's the key of what we're trying to do, is how can we better deliver business insights? It's not just aggregating information. We could get people to do that, but it's how can we have the information at our fingertips? How could we then expose that information to the business, to the leaders, to the decision makers, with actionable insights that come along with that? Because as you all know, if you don't have the data, if you don't have it timely, there's no insights that you can deliver. And so you're always looking backwards, whereas if we can shift it now, we have the data, now what does it mean? And that's both fulfilling from, both being able to better run your enterprise and being able to make actionable recommendations, but also from the people standpoint. People want to be able to think. There's not a lot of thinking when you're just consolidating data, calling a business unit, calling a location. Can you send me this? Can you send me this? I need to aggregate this. That's not fun. But now that you're actually able to see the full picture and you can, okay, how's the unit performing? What are some areas that we could recommend for this function or this business? Those are the insights that ultimately we need to get to. And we've already started to be able to do that. We have global dashboards now that we can drill through from the top all the way down to the bottom. We have functional views across the enterprise, FTE views. We actually get, for our biggest expense, which is people, we get a workforce, we use Workday, but we have integrations from Workday on a regular basis that previously was once a year. And so just having all of that now at our fingertips, it's just kind of the tip of the iceberg as we start to build that out. But taking these dashboards even to our executive committee on a regular basis, to their direct reports, all across the business, now what we're seeing is they're all seeing the same look and feel, the same, categories, the same when we say, how much is our consulting spend? We're not arguing about—
Zero, isn't it, Jay?
One day. How much is consulting spend? And everybody arguing about, well, that's really, outsourcing, that's not consulting, or that's, and then you never actually get to the conversation. And so just in this short period, you can already see what we've been able to do. And we'll talk about still what's to come with allocations and a lot of other things. And then the last point I'll hit on would just be our operating model. We've now moved from having a center team, an enterprise team of, we'll call it 3 expense management individuals, and we've now moved individuals from all over the business to support now the global system. And so now people who are supporting one unit, they're supporting a more the full enterprise. And so we've had a lot of success there as we've worked through that, and Kimberly's been leading up some of those efforts with those new with the new operating model.
Yeah, and one of the things that's really been fulfilling has been to see the collaborative culture. So before, the divisions, for the most part, were working in silos, kind of doing their own thing. The management team would kind of work across, but usually those that were on the team were kind of doing their own thing. And so as we've come together through working through the testing, developing the system in a way that supports our business, we've seen that they've really come together and developed this community across. And so as we rolled it out, we saw the team members helping one another. And so they weren't just going to the subject matter experts, they were going to one another, even across divisions. And so that was really nice to see that. And then having that consistent process across the organization has led to more mobility of talent. So we've seen the ability, it's helped to open up opportunities for people to move into new roles. Before, they used to be more of a jack of all trades, but now it's opened up these opportunities to do some new things like allocations that we'll talk about in a minute. But one of the things that we really learned is changing systems is easy. It's changing people. That's where the real challenge is. So it does take time to work through it and make sure that you take that time to focus on the people. But along the way, we made sure that we stuck to our North Star priorities and kept that focus so that as we were working through things, we made sure that we were going in the right direction. And then now that we have the data in one system, this is where the real excitement comes. So it's allowed us to move from maybe doing like gut insights, I think this is what we're going to see, to now we have those data-driven insights, like Jay was talking about, being able to have that information at your fingertips. So before, it seemed like you would spend most of your time gathering up the data and then do that quick analysis, usually ad hoc at the end. Now that you've got that data readily available, we know that it's a trusted source of data, we know that it's been normalized, we know that we're all talking the same language. That allows us to now focus more on the analytics and really being able to unlock those business insights.
Yep, and if you go back to what I said earlier, 2 years ago, couldn't answer a basic question about just category. 2 weeks ago, Kimberly gets asked about, trends of levels of positions across the company, et cetera. And in the same day, she was able to turn around those FTE trends by level, by function, different units going back 5 years. That in the past would have been probably impossible. And she was able to now do that within a week. And so having that infrastructure is now able to now point out these insights that previously we had a gut feel of what was happening, but now we can actually back that up with real data.
And Jay, though, I do recall a conversation we had shortly after we went live with expenses, and I think the team's excitement probably went a little bit too far when you guys started to talking to Daryl, the CEO, about what's available.
That's true.
Which sort of resulted in some interesting conversations.
Yes, I was going to get to that, but we'll hit it now. It'd be a lesson learned. So before you start showing new stuff to your CEO and CFO and others, make sure to manage their expectations. So we did a demo because we have to show, I kept telling the teams, we need to get a quick win here. We need to get a win. And so we showed, Daryl used to be our CFO before he became CEO, so well aware of the challenges. And then Vibhu's our new CFO. So we debuted to show them, here's what we now have at our fingertips. And Daryl, he could not be more excited. Somebody who reports to Kimberly was able to go and present it to Daryl. He was beyond excited. And then our CFO, he was like, okay, we got to get this in front of everybody tomorrow. And I'm like, no, we are months away from being able to go. And somehow months away turned into 30 days. And so he kept saying, 30 days and then I'm in, 30 days. And so, but the excitement of just them going from not having it at their fingertips to now seeing we are very close to now having these dashboards that they can go in and they can actually self-service, poke around, and get their insights and get some of that. It really is a game changer. Really is a game changer. So looking back, so kind of hindsight, David jumped ahead to my managing expectations, but managing expectations, I would say, is critical because if there's an expectation gap between what you're delivering and the executive team, whatever that might look like, the sponsors, that is super critical because if you're not aligned on timing and what you're actually getting, then when you deliver, you may feel like a failure. In our case, we had good alignment. There were some areas where we could have done better, but if they're expecting to get a Rolls Royce and you deliver a Honda Accord, that's not going to be viewed favorably. And so managing those expectations, critical. Change management, Kimberly hit on that a little bit, but the people part of it, just can't underestimate the amount of communication, the amount of just letting everybody know what is changing, why we're changing. Some of that goes back to North Stars, but the change management, even though we took it seriously, we still underestimated. We had change managers, we had all of that. We still underestimated the level of effort and something that we could have done better. Resourcing, in the past, we've always run projects where everyone just kind of does it in the side. This was the first time we actually pulled Kimberly out of her day job, and she was devoted 100%. We had globally, Jess, who's over there, she's 100% devoted to our efforts. But if we hadn't had that ability to do that, we would have failed. And so being able to have the dedicated teams is critical. And we still could have gone further. Some of the other units didn't have that, which impacted our testing, our ability to do our BAU. And so that can be a challenge. And then governance and leadership. Like I mentioned before, we had tried to start up a transformation program going back 4 years or so. And every time we did, we couldn't get it over the hump because it felt more like a grassroots effort. We're trying to get everybody to align, get all the divisions to agree, and then a division would opt out or somebody wouldn't be part of it. Whereas now with our One Pacific Life, there wasn't an option. And so when push comes to shove, the executive committee is aligned on this is our direction. And so it takes all that friction out that previously everybody's battling about, well, I don't want to do this, I want to do this. And now it lets us really move forward.
And I think tied to that, Jay, a little bit, sort of that collaboration, communication piece, it's actually equally important to actually do it within the project team. And as an example, and Kimberly mentioned a little bit, we had friction between the team. We had instances of miscommunication where I would get one message from my team, Jay would get something different from his team, and we got together and we were like, okay, hold on, something's not working here because we're on the same page, we think they're on the same page, but this is not working. And so we actually took the team offline for half a day and sort of get everybody in the room. And
what did we call it? A clear the air session.
Clear the air session. It was important. But I mean, we did it actually with the broader team, not just at the leadership level, because the challenges in communication was at the ground root level, and it gave us the opportunity in a safe space to actually talk about what do people mean, how do we communicate better, and really just sort of solidified the strength of the team together, I think, and we definitely came out of that much stronger than we were going into it. And also recognizing that, ask the questions. Don't assume stuff, but also none of us have negative intent. I mean, we're in this to be successful, so we adjusted that. And then the other thing that comes to mind is more internally, we continue to listen to the business around their needs and how they can adopt. And we like we said before, we went to 2-week test cycles, but more recently, for the one part that we were doing, we felt there was more time needed. And so I think it's a 4-week open window that we created for people to go into the application, explore it, use it, get used to it, to help with that adoption and understanding and refinement. And so I think it's super critical to remain attuned to what's going on within the project team, but also equally with what's needed, with the business stakeholders as we engage them.
Yeah, and keep in, and for those that haven't gone, like these, it is a journey, and it really is a journey, and it's like anything. When you kick the project off, everyone's excited, we're gung-ho, it's like, I don't know if you like baseball, or baseball season starts off, it's exciting. I'm more of a basketball, football guy, so after that first couple of games, you're like, wait, we have 160 more of these things? Like the dog days of summer, it's just a long time. And the project's the same. You go from excitement to now you're in the midst of the storm. There's team dynamics. And so it's that communication and that honesty that has to happen. At the leadership level, it's easy, but it's at the, where they're getting it actually done. That's where the friction really comes into the process.
And one of the areas where we really saw that we needed to be flexible and shift was when it came to data. So data kind of underpins everything we do, and getting it right at the beginning is absolutely critical. David had talked about building out a new chart of accounts. So knowing that beforehand was really important because you need to know your dimensions that you're going to be putting into the system. So data. And as much time as you can put up front into understanding your data and also getting it prepared, that makes the whole process a lot easier.
The other piece, Kimberly, that we sort of talked about as we were thinking about this session was the importance of actually using real data.
Yes.
And not made up.
Yes.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, so what we found is that when people were going through the earlier testing sessions, the CRP sessions, we were using, it was kind of real data, but it wasn't quite there. And so when people would come up against something, they'd say, oh, it's just the data. And so they wouldn't really push hard or question it. And that led to problems further down that if we'd known early on, because when you have your own data, you just kind of have this sixth sense about it. You just know what the answer's supposed to be, and oh, okay, there's something just not right. The spidey senses are tingling. And so when you use fake data, it just makes it harder for people to really understand, is it just because I'm not comfortable with the data, or is it that things are just not working the way that they really should?
Yeah, and I think it's that, but then also the pieces where sort of the values within some of those dimensions become super critical. And if you're thinking you're dealing with 10 different variations versus 100 different variations, all of those things actually really matters, and sort of like really understanding those things in the data up front and then using it throughout the process becomes so much easier to actually get to the end goal versus a little bit of swirling as we go.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about sort of where we're going from here and sort of where we are with this, Jay, as we continue the conversation.
Yep. So I won't sit here and paint the rosiest picture. We just went live, so we're still learning. We're learning the system. We're learning how to support a global system. Like I said, it's our first global finance system. And so we're still learning what does that model look like, roles and responsibilities. All of that is going to take some time to mature. Then you get to the data and the insights. Like I said, insights are the most important, but now we're moving from people whose roles was a lot more around maybe consolidating and some of the partnering, but now we have all this data. Well, what do we do with it? Like what are the insights that we should be providing? How do we look at this? Who do we put it in front of? And so there's a cadence there of how we work and how we process. So we're still working through all of that. And then the final piece, within expense management would be finalizing allocations. So allocations, as everyone knows, can be very complex. And so David will give us a little bit around allocations and what's upcoming.
Yeah, and I think it's as technologies have evolved, and if we think about sort of doing the right things within the Oracle architecture, allocations is another example. We used to having the allocation rules in the ledger. Was the same with PeopleSoft. We had the rules for Pacific Life. But the key is sort of moving it out because we want to reuse those allocation rules for planning and forecasting purposes as much as for actuals. And so that process of shifting where things happen and moving allocation rules to EPM was super important. Then I think, Kimberly, equally to that is, where you had sort of a lot of management reporting in the ledger before, we've moved management reporting elements out of the ledger so that it's simplified, and we're putting management reporting in sort of the management ledger in the right place in EPM. And so maybe touch a little bit on that change, but also a little bit about sort of what we're doing on the journey.
Sure. So allocations is where we've now built that foundation. So now we can use that data to take it to the next level to really bubble up those business insights. And so one of the things that we looked at is how can we simplify our allocations? So everyone, we were doing the right allocations, but again, different teams were doing it differently. And some were on a different path in the journey. So we have one division that's pretty new, so they're just stepping their toe into it, whereas others had really taken it all the way down and had very deep allocations and were using it in different ways. So we looked at how could we have a consistent methodology that we used across the enterprise so that we could have insights that we could compare across the organization. And even if it's something like products where each division has different product models that we're doing, but still looking at where's that fundamental methodology where we can ground on that. And then the nice thing about this system is that it's very flexible in allocations. And so there are different ways that we can do the rules. And wherever people were on their journey, we were able to meet them there. So they have that opportunity to continue to mature into it as we go.
And what I loved about the way that you guys have approached allocations is thinking about what's the right place to do it, but also being willing and brave enough to say, do we actually still need this allocation?
Yes.
Or can we actually just stop doing it, which I think there's several of those where it's like, hey, it's not really relevant for us anymore, so we can stop, which is always great.
We had a really complex corporate allocation model that we implemented years ago. And as part of this project, we realized nobody used, and it was a project 6 years ago, and nobody uses it. It doesn't give any insights. It's very time consuming and complex. And we went around the company and nobody even knew we did it. And it's this massive effort. And so we just ripped it out and said, nope, we're done. Completely simplified it, and nobody cared. And so things like that, as you go through the transformation of just not redoing what you're currently doing, but really, really challenging.
Just on that as well, Jay, I think that the simple way we handled some of those things was a very simple question that sort of still sticks with me, which was, if this doesn't influence the decision that's being made, why do it? And I think that's sort of a core tenet that we followed and continue to follow as we go through stuff.
Yep. The problem with that, though, is that now every staff person, anytime you ask a question, they go, well, what insight is that? Or what decision is that changing? And you're like, oh my gosh. But anyway, okay, we're in the home stretch, last couple of minutes here before happy hour, I think, for everybody. And so maybe we'll just hit, so like we said, there is a broader transformation part, so accounting and reporting, but then even with FP&A, this was the expense portion. We have allocations to finish, and then we still have our whole non-expense side of the house. So, the actual insurance business, the revenues, all of that we're still working through and bringing into Oracle as well. That's going to take a little bit longer when you think about an organization like ours with the dependencies on actuarial models. So there's a lot of things out there that make it a little bit more complex. But that's the next phase of the journey over the next year or so, is now how do we bring that full planning forecasting together? And so we still have a ways to go there.
And I think, Jay, that to me, that's the exciting and cool part, because I think sort of like expenses is less sexy than when we get to the insurance stuff. If you lived in insurance, the insurance world is always
I don't think
super
sexy
cool.
and insurance go together.
Okay, it's only me. But so we're looking at sort of driver models and what that really means for life and annuity business and the products, and how do you think about it, and what are the things that really drives behaviors and outcomes, and really starting to think forward-looking. And a lot of these things you guys were, to some degree or a large degree, doing today, but using Excel and otherwise. But inconsistency, again, across divisions about how they do it and processes. And so this part of the journey is definitely going to be more complex. It's how do we bring those pieces together in a greater consistency? How do we make sure that there's consistency in views? Because this is the business part of it. This is some of these things I feel like a little bit holy grail items for people personally, where we probably are going to break some glass on this one. But it's also then the collaboration with actuarial and investments, where there's highly complex models that's needed to actually really start looking forward and help with projections. And the key for this one is not around actuals. It really is around how do we take the information that's available and actually start looking in the future and being able to more dynamically sort of forward project how things are going to play out and what to expect in the business. And so to me, that's sort of like the super cool part of what we're going to do, but also it's going to bring some challenges.
Definitely. Well, great. So as we kind of wrap up here in the last couple of minutes, I think one of the biggest pieces here, it is the classic, I'll sound like a consultant, but if we can get all this right, it really is flipping the 80% consolidating, 20% analysis, and flipping that around. And I know that always gets thrown around, but that's what we've already seen in expenses in a short period of time. And it'll only continue to get better. And so I'm excited just for our workforce and our talent around the amount of time that's going to get saved on that stuff that nobody really likes to do. And then how can we now get everybody thinking better, thinking forward? What are those insights? And really start to enable some of those pieces that I know Kimberly and team are already doing.
Yeah, and one of the things that's really helpful also is, again, we talked about is starting small and doing that incremental. So there are some things where we have this vision, but we know we're not going to get all there in the first step. So being comfortable with moving into it and starting to mature into some of these things, that really helps with having that success along the journey.
Yep.
So, calling the 2-minute audible, Jay, since you used football analogies before, Kimberly, what sort of your key takeaways for this audience based on what we've gone through? What sort of the key things that we want them to actually maybe learn from what we've done versus cutting it on their own?
Right, so again, flexibility. So being willing to kind of step back and adjust course and pivot along the way so that you are still going in the right direction, keeping that North Star, and then data. Making sure that you have that good data throughout is going to make it a much easier process.
Yep.
Last thoughts from you, Jay?
Yep, I would agree. The North Stars are critical, communication of the North Stars, and the leadership buy-in. Before you embark on something of this size, you have to have that leadership buy-in and alignment on what those North Stars are. And if you have that, then you get to the even overs where you get things presented to you and it's like, well, if we do this, we can't hit our North Stars, and that's going to keep everything aligned going forward. But it's a journey, and some of these programs for for larger organizations. As you know, it's not overnight, but the quicker you can go live, have your backlog, and then start to make incremental improvements, I'm a huge believer in that versus a big bang, everything has to be perfect.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's, for me, it's that you gotta listen to each other and your stakeholder community, and you need flexibility and adaptability. I mean, it's thinking you can do this in one way and that way is always gonna work. It's sort of a little bit of a recipe for disaster. So I think that paying attention and actually listening to each other is super important. So as we close it out, folks, we are coming to the end of this conversation. We appreciate the time, Kimberly and Jay. Appreciate you guys being up here and actually talking through this. I know it's sometimes awkward to talk about a journey that's in progress, but truly appreciate it. And for the audience that joined us, hopefully you gleaned a little bit of insight from what we've talked through that'll help you on your own journey with your clients.
Great. Thank you.